Our next speaker is Zach Holman from GitHub, and he's going to talk about why GitHub has never lost an employee. Let's give it up for Zach and GitHub.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to apologize if you came for the badass dream team, GitHub, whatever it was. My title is a little bit more bland. I save all the over-the-top adjectives for all of my Hacker News submissions instead. So, we're going to talk about keeping people. I should look at my notes, because I need my notes to figure out who I am. I'm Zach Holman, Holman on GitHub, Holman on Twitter, and I do work for GitHub. I will be partially talking about GitHub, so it would be weird if I just started getting up here and started talking about GitHub randomly if I didn't actually work there. So it's okay. I've been there for 3.5 years now. I was number 9, and we've grown quite a bit. This is totally wrong now. We're now at 199 employees. We can't fit around the same table like we used to back in the day. So that's cool. I guess everyone loves this number. No one's ever quit GitHub. People tend to love it. And I don't want to get caught up on numbers as much because this could change tomorrow and it's not that big of a deal. I just want to say this is a good thing. I got in an argument on Twitter once with some guy who maintained we aren't working people hard enough. People should be angry and pissed off and quit in a rage of tears and fury. And I was like, no, you're fucking dumb. Like, people should be happy. Like, have employees that are really, really stoked to be there and work there. And the main reason for this whole talk and what I want to talk about today is that replacing people is really hard. And I don't think people understand this enough. Like, if you break down the numbers of how all this stuff works out, you have if I decide to quit tomorrow, I have my 2 weeks notice or whatever, the company may have to take like 2 months of interviews to try and figure out, oh, who is the right person for this job? Sometimes that can take a lot shorter, sometimes that can take a lot longer. We've been looking for some people for like a year and we just haven't found the right person yet. And then once that person starts at the company, it can take months before they feel like they're in the code base or in the pixels, before they feel like, yeah, I'm contributing to this company in a really good fashion. So I mean, it can take like up to half a year to replace people. And I don't think people recognize that enough. It sucks to lose people. And as much as we want to talk about hiring and product development and all this sort of stuff, which is all really important, it's also important that you don't lose people. I don't think our industry worries about this enough. Before I joined GitHub, I left my company and I put in my 2 weeks notice. And I talked to my boss, and he's like, oh, all right, we knew you weren't happy here. So then I talked to my boss's boss, said the same sort of thing. He's like, oh, well, we just knew you weren't happy here. Then I talked to my boss's boss's boss in a company of 15, so that's sort of the first time. And he said the same thing. He's like, oh, well, we knew you weren't happy here. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, if you knew, I've been here for 2.5 years, make me happy, Like, that's the simple thing here. So that just kind of blew my mind. And people just should worry more about making their employees happy. So I want to cover 4 different traits of GitHub's retention today. One is work is creative, your product is your product, attachment to the unique, and really good hiring. I made these really abstract so you can't read ahead on what I'm going to say. It's exciting. First of all, work is creative. And I believe this a lot. Because of burnout. As much as people like to say that coding in particular, programming, building products and stuff, is all ones and zeros and computering and all this sort of things, it's not just logic, it's very creative. How fast can you make this code go in the least amount of lines? How elegant can you make this? That's just problem solving. It's creative approaches to solutions. And burnout can happen if you're not really excited on what you're working on. So one of the answers I think GitHub does really well is to let people float between jobs. That was the coolest animation I have in my deck, so I hope you liked it. But let them float between jobs a lot. I'm on job number 5 at GitHub. I started on sort of like in an enterprise support role, development, sales, a whole bunch of different hats all at once. Moved on to like working on our job stuff, and then GitHub.com, doing a bunch of speaking, and now GitHub.com and a bunch of internal projects as well. That's awesome, because for me, it moved position unhappiness off the table. And I see this a lot with a lot of friends where they're just like, yeah, the company's all right, but I'm just bummed on what I work on. Like, maybe it's an awesome job, and you just, after a year or two, you get really bored of whatever you're working on. Like, that happens to even the best job in the world. So if you let people float around to different things, become much more flexible on what they want to do, it becomes more exciting. In the short term, this may mean really small hacks, new projects, learning. GitHub, I think, does a really good job with not really caring what you're working on today. If you feel really passionate about, I really want to help out our deployment infrastructure, you can just go do that instead of working on whatever you want to work on today, because you think that's important, and you're going to be much more excited to work on that. And then the long-term new focus, which is what I've done and a bunch of stuff at GitHub has done, just working on a different job entirely. We've had people go from like enterprise support to video production. Like they were not hired for video production. We probably didn't know that they knew video production at all, but letting them do that makes them happier, and they're going to produce better work that way. Reducing the overhead for anything, I think, is really critical in making people happy. Nobody likes the man. And I'm not just talking about the NSA here because they're a bunch of jerks, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can become the man. Code review can definitely become the man. The number of times I've sat in a room with like projected code on the wall, and you go by line and say, yeah, this makes sense, that makes me so angry. Code review can feel like it's getting in the way of actually doing work. Can you figure out a better way to make code review easier for your employees and still retain the code quality of that sort of in-person touch? I think you can. The same sort of thing with design reviews. They can become much more slower if you're all in a room trying to look at pixels on a wall or something. Meetings are definitely the man. Meetings are definitely assholes too, because meetings are horrible. No one knows how to run them. There's too many people. They bring in so many different things. No one knows what they're doing. There's too many people. They go for so long. There's too many people, and they go for so long. Like, meetings are just the worst thing on the planet. Sometimes if you do them and run them really well, they make sense. But for the most part, I think that they can get in the way of, especially a lot of developers, trying to actually do real work. Same sort of thing with directives up from high, even if those directives are right. If someone's just trying to say, all right, now just go do this right now, I think that can make a lot of unhappy people, because they want to feel like they have value in the organization to say, this is what I want to do next because I think it's best for the company. Friction is frustrating. And I think beyond a lot of other things at jobs, really good people who work really well just want to do things. And if you're putting up all these roadblocks and saying, okay, you got to go through this process first before you can actually commit code or before you can do this design, that just makes people really angry. Automation is a really big approach for this too. Can you build apps? Can you build things to help people not have to do this stuff? Developers are really good at spending weeks on some problem that will save them a minute a day. And it doesn't make any sense, but it saves that minute may be so heinous to them that it just makes them happier to do away with it. And at GitHub, we found that automation is almost always the better answer. Even in that case where you spend weeks on something that saves you 1 minute a day, now we're at 200 people. If that saves everybody 1 minute a day, it's almost always going to end up making sense mathematically as well. So figuring out better internal tools, I think that ends up making a much more happier work environment. I like to say we also hire people that frustrate easy. These are sort of fixers. If we hire a developer and they're sitting down and working on our development process, the way we sort of work and commit code, and they're suddenly thinking, man, why the hell am I doing it this way? For us, we've maybe been doing it for years, and I'm just like, I don't know, that's just what we've done. I want him or her to say, no, this is stupid, let's just try this something else. I want somebody to go out of the sort of structured job title that they have and fix stuff. So hire people who are frustrated by things that aren't as efficient or effective as they want them to be. Also, your product is your product. This is sort of the next part I want to talk about. Always own your product. What does that mean? I think the reason why we say this is that good people like to feel in charge. Again, they feel like they want to have value to the organization. They want you as the founder, or CEO, or their boss, or whatever, to say, I can talk to this person and feel like I have an impact on the actual company's vision itself. For us, bootstrapping was really good for us. I mean, we didn't take funding until 3.5, 4 years or something into the company, which was great because we were making money, we were profitable, and whenever VCs came to us, we could just say, all right, no, and it would be totally fine. And then they keep coming back at us, and when the time came where it made sense to start pursuing VC, they threw money at us, basically, which was really nice because now we had really good terms, and we can keep control of the company in a very big way. You're not being forced to make poor product decisions. And I think that's the problem when you give up a lot of equity or you give up a lot of just control of the company. Now you're a slave to somebody else. And now who's making the decisions? That's the main problem. Ifs are lies. I don't think this surprises a lot of people. I think most users are idiots. If you ever worked support, you probably know this is true. They come up with the weirdest stuff, and you're like, why are you doing this? But the most dangerous thing that they'll ever say is, I'll use your product if you add so-and-so. And this is terrible because it's such a weird position, and it comes up all the time. GitHub saw this a lot earlier on. The first couple of years of the company, a lot of established open source projects would say, well, you know, that's a nice toy product or whatever, but I'll only use you if you add priority milestones, 2.0, whatever. And to their credit, the founders were like, oh, interesting, but no, we're going to keep going on our vision. And that was really awesome, because almost always what happened is a couple months later, they didn't care, and then they joined GitHub anyway. This is particularly important in enterprise, because usually enterprise will be like, here's $200,000. And as developers or designers, whoever you end up being, you may look at that and say, all right, this will only take an hour, and then they'll give us this check for like a ridiculous amount of money. I'm just going to do it. And it's easy to say yes and like, you know, go down all these like weird routes. But the number of times where we've talked to really large companies that said, I really need you to do this, otherwise we won't use you, and then we said no, then they just use us anyway. Like, it's fantastic. You talk to these people, and they're just like, oh, I just had to ask that because of my manager, and I literally had a feature checklist. And you're like, no. And then they're like, OK, we're going to use you anyway. Here's the check. It's amazing. So I think ifs are really dangerous because they dilute the product. If you add all these, like, literally conditionals in the code sometimes, like if so-and-so, weird, whatever, it dilutes the product, and you have to support all this stuff. And you know, if you're a developer and you've sort of come onto a code base that is really well maintained, you know that feeling of just, it makes you feel happy. And the reverse is totally true too. If you come on a code base and it has all these weird, you know, oh, we did this for this one client and it was really weird, it stresses you out. It makes you unhappy to work on that product. And it makes you less happy. Dogfooding is also really awesome. It means that building the stuff you use means recursive happiness. So for GitHub, you know, we work on GitHub. We use GitHub to build GitHub. And if there's something that I see in my day-to-day business that really makes me angry, I can fix it. And then it fixes the product. That's really good for a lot of different ways. For one, it's easy to recruit because we can hire people who use GitHub. And this sort of is a nice sort of recursive cycle that way. And it's also a lot easier to build because you know you're your own client. The problem is what happens if you're in a company that you aren't necessarily the person, the target market. I was giving a talk at a small company who dealt in like maternity wear or something like that. And I was looking around, and it's literally all like 22-year-old dudes. I'm like, I don't think you're a woman or pregnant, so you may have a harder time dog fooding your own app. So for that, I mean, it's just like, if you have the choice, try and pick stuff that you can dog food and use yourself, because it's a great cycle to be in. Attachment to the unique. I think people stick around for really interesting reasons. And it's not necessarily based on salary or the normal stuff. Like if you ask around, people have very weird reasons for why they like to work at the place that they like to work. So I want to bring up a couple of weird random things that works at GitHub that I think is strange and interesting. One is the music, just literally music. I mean, we work on Git repos all day, so it's really technical and kind of boring sometimes. It's nice to have music at the office. I was saying earlier, we just moved into a new office, and our landlord's not an asshole, so we can play music again, and we get dogs. And it's like a nice little side culture where you can learn what other people are listening to. We can control this all through our chat rooms. It's really nice. And then we also have like a weird DJ culture, too. If like you're a programmer and you know music, and you can count to 4, you can DJ. It's amazing. I think there's a lot of clubs that do that as well. Not a lot of good DJs anymore. But we're all terrible DJs, and it's really fun. Anyway, it's a nice, really weird aspect of GitHub that we didn't start out to make, but I think it's a really compelling reason to stay for a lot of us. Travel's also a really big one for us. We do this thing if you are accepted to speak at a conference anywhere in the world, GitHub will fly you out. But they'll also fly out a companion to fly out with you, so you can actually, a coworker. So you can sort of work on stuff together or at least not go to lunch by yourself. As a side story, the reason why we had this policy is one of the co-founders went to China, and then we threw a drink up like we normally do, and then no one there spoke English, I guess, and he was just sort of by himself on the side, all sad and crying. So he's like, never again. So now we're going to send somebody everywhere. But anyway, I digress. Travel is actually really cool. And that's sort of a nice thing that's popped up where it's not necessarily like a main benefit we talk about that much, but it gets people around. They can see the world. They can interact with users that they wouldn't normally interact with. Chat's also really epic for us. We do everything through chat. If we're working on the same product at the same table, rather than tap you on the shoulder, I'm still going to talk to you through chat. Lots of really business important things like deployments and stuff go through there. Lots of really important things like animated GIFs go through chat. All of this, it forms a culture that's actually really awesome. And it means we don't have to do meetings. It means we don't have to talk to people in real life unless we can opt into human interaction, which is all that we've ever wanted in life, right? So the reason why I bring this up is just, think about what your interesting reasons are. I swear to God I didn't talk to, oh my God, Caitlin? Carolyn. I didn't talk to you before this, but Catherine, damn it. Whatever. I'm bad with names. But culture is not ping pong tables. She said it first, so I'm just going to say I'm stealing it or something. Or it means we both said it, which means this is the biggest takeaway of the entire day, that culture is not ping pong tables. But I say this all the time to college students and stuff out of school, like Xboxes, free Cokes, all that weird stuff that Microsoft gives out. Just kidding. Thanks for the venue. No, but that stuff, it just doesn't matter as much as like the really weird stuff. At my old company, I'm kind of embarrassed to bring this up because it's so stupid, but our development team would get together and we'd print out these little pieces of paper and we'd put them in books and stuff, and they'd open the book and be like, I got you. It doesn't make any sense, and it's really stupid to say out loud, but it was a dumb little thing that was really fun amongst my development team that was interesting. So think about how you can, sort of produce those sorts of things. Finally, I want to talk about really good hiring. Everyone talks about hire A players. Steve Jobs told me this once. Not me, but everybody once. Hire A players. They're so much better. But I mean, there are a lot of A players, which sounds weird because maybe there's subsets of A players or something. But it's really the case. It's more about what you consider an A player. What do you value as an A player? We wouldn't hire people who are just only the best code master in the world because they're boring. I want people who are much more broader and have an interest in a lot of different things because it's more fascinating. So identifying that for us that's the trick. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that. Open source hackers is really good for us. One, the obvious, we want people who work on GitHub to work at GitHub, so that's great. But even if I didn't work at GitHub, a version control system, I'd still want to find open source hackers. The number of times when I post a job somewhere and then you immediately get 200 resumes and you're like, what do I do now? That's where it really comes in handy. Because open source, you can actually see their work. Before we bring people into the office to interview, we probably know how good you are based on what code you used, like an informal phone screen. The idea is that we know a lot about how you work before you actually have to spend the time in the office telling us about how amazing you are. So open source is great. More importantly, I think they solve their own problems. The open source hacker, the problem with this is that I don't want people who are 9 to 5, work really hard at work, and then at home, 9 to 5 in the morning or something, work really hard on open source. I don't want workaholics, but I want somebody who, on their own time, decides to work on interesting problems. Because open source is really interesting, because it's not just code. There's a lot of marketing in open source. There's a lot of user support. There's a lot of things. It's sort of a full stack product that you don't actually realize. So that's really awesome. Also, hiring slowly. People kind of make fun of us because GitHub hires a lot nowadays, but I think the more important part is that GitHub was under 10 people for the first 2.5 years, which was a lot slower than a lot of people I talked to. I was just talking to a friend, and he's like, yeah, a 6-month-old company, we're on track to hire 18 by the end of the year. I'm just like, why would you possibly? It's confusing. But I think there's a main reason why I say this is that if you wait a long time to start hiring a lot more people down the line, you can have a firmer vision. So it's easier for people to jump on and say, okay, I'm just going to augment this vision rather than trying to figure out the vision on my own. Which seems kind of negative, but I think it's actually a big positive because then it's just a lot more focused. You already have the product figured out, and then you just build the product rather than trying to figure out what the product is to build. So hiring slowly is really good. And I think quick hiring generates a lot of confusion here. At some point between like about 75 or 100, I think GitHub started hiring a little bit too quickly. It was kind of a weird spot where we hadn't traditionally worked in teams, and we're getting to the point of today where we have really good teams set out, and we're trying to figure out the migration between the two, and we were just hiring too fast as we went through that spot. So we figured that out, to our credit, amazingly, and we slowed down hiring, and it worked out really well. And we got over that hump, and then once we figured that out, we could speed up hiring, and it didn't really impact us that much. So it's, hire slowly as much as you can, hire deliberately, hire better people, and you just end up with a much firmer workforce. So that's keeping people. The main reason why I bring all this stuff up is that I think it really does matter. As much as we're talking about, like, what position is my Hacker News story on today, worry about keeping people happy, because that's really what it comes down to. Everything flows from people. This is like a cliche. Everything in my talk is basically a cliche, but there's a reason why people say it, because people are important. And just build really good culture and worry about this stuff, because culture is one of those things that if you mess it up earlier on and say, oh, I'm going to get to this like next week or next month, and we're going to figure out our culture, that just never works. Figure this out really early on, and then always maintain it. Always ask yourself, are we fucking up right now? Is this a problem? Can we make this stuff better at all? And then that's just going to make you a better company. So that's what I got. Thanks.